Hello again. I'm going to continue The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. When we left off, the old man had gone to bed and he was dreaming of Africa and the smell of the land breeze that it brought in the morning. Usually, when he smelled the land breeze, he woke up and dressed to go and wake the boy. But tonight, the smell of the land breeze came very early, and he knew it was too early in his dream and went on dreaming to see the white peaks of the islands rising from the sea, and then he dreamed of the different harbors and the roadsteads of the Canary Islands. He no longer dreamed of storms, nor of women, nor of great occurrences, nor of great fish, nor fights, nor contest of strength, nor of his wife. He only dreamed of places now, and of the lions on the beach. They played like young cats in the dusk, and he loved them as he loved the boy. He never dreamed about the boy. He simply woke, looked out the open door at the moon, and unrolled his trousers and put them on. He urinated outside the shack and then went up the road to wake the boy. He was shivering with the morning cold, but he knew he would shiver himself warm and that soon he would be rowing. The door of the house where the boy lived was unlocked, and he opened it and walked in quietly with his bare feet. The boy was asleep on a cot in the first room, and the old man could see him clearly with the light that came in from the dying moon. He took hold of one foot gently and held it until the boy woke and turned and looked at him. The old man nodded, and the boy took his trousers from the chair by the bed, and sitting on the bed, he pulled them on. The old man went out the door, and the boy came after. He was sleepy, and the old man put his arm across his shoulders and said, "I am sorry." "Keva," said the boy, "it is what a man must do." They walked down the road to the old man's shack, and all along the road in the dark, barefoot men were moving, carrying the mast of their boats. When they reached the old man's shack, the boy took the rolls of line in the basket, and the harpoon, and the gaff, and the old man carried the mast with the furled sail on his shoulder. "Do you want coffee?" the boy asked. We'll put the gear in the boat and then get some." They had coffee from condensed milk cans at an early morning place that served fishermen. "How did you sleep, old man?" the boy asked. He was waking up now, although it was still hard for him to leave his sleep. "Very well, Manolin," the old man said. "I feel confident today." "So do I," the boy said. "Now I must get your sardines and mine, and your fresh baits. He brings our gear himself. He never wants me to carry anything." "We're different," the old man said. "I let you carry things when you were 5 years old." "I know it," the boy said. "I'll be right back. Have another coffee. We have credit here." He walked off, barefooted on the coral rocks, to the ice house where the baits were stored. The old man drank his coffee slowly. It was all he would have all day, and he knew that he should take it. For a long time now, eating had bored him, and he never carried a lunch. He had a bottle of water in the bow of the skiff, and that was all he'd need for the day. The boy was back now with the sardines and the two baits wrapped in a newspaper, and they went down to the trail to the skiff, feeling the pebbled sand under their feet, and lifted the skiff and slid her into the water. "Good luck, old man. Good luck," the old man said. He fitted the rope lashings of the oars into the thole pins, and leaning forward against the thrusts of the blades in the water, he began to row out of the harbor and into the dark. There were other boats from other beaches going out to sea, and the old man heard the dip and push of their oars, even though he could not see them now the moon was below the hills. Sometimes someone would speak in a boat, but most of the boats were silent except for the dip of the oars. They spread apart after they were out of the mouth of the harbor, and each one headed for the part of the ocean where he hoped to find fish. The old man knew he was going far out, and he left the smell of the land behind and rode out into the clean, early morning smell of the ocean. He saw the phosphorescence of the Gulf weed in the water as he rode over the part of the ocean that the fishermen called the Great Well, because there was a sudden deep of 700 fathoms, where all sorts of fish congregated because of the swirl of the current that it made against the steep walls of the floor of the ocean. Here there were concentrations of shrimp and baitfish, and sometimes schools of squid in the deepest holes, and those rose close to the surface at night, where all the wandering fish fed on them. In the dark, the old man could feel the morning coming, and as he rode, he heard the trembling sound as flying fish left the water, and the hissing that their stiff-set wings made as they soared away into the darkness. He was very fond of flying fish, as they were his principal friends on the ocean. He was sorry for the birds, especially the small, delicate, dark terns that were always flying and looking, and almost never finding. And he thought, the birds have a harder life than we do, except for the robber birds and the heavy, strong ones. Why did they make birds so delicate and fine as those sea swallows when the ocean can be so cruel? She is kind and very beautiful, but she can be so cruel, and it comes so suddenly, and such birds that fly, dipping and hunting, with their small, sad voices, are made too delicately for the sea. He always thought of the sea as La Mar, which is what his people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys on their floats as lines and had motorboats, bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as El Mar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant or a place or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as feminine and something that gave or withheld great favors. And if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought. He was rowing steadily, and it was no effort for him since he kept well within his speed and the surface of the ocean was flat, except for the occasional swirls of the current. He was letting the current do a third of the work, and as it started to be light, he saw he was already further out than he had hoped to be at this hour. I worked the deep wells for a week and did nothing, he thought. Today I'll work out where the schools of Bonito and Albuquerque are, and maybe there will be a big one with them. Before it was really light, he had had his baits out and was drifting with the current. One bait was down 40 fathoms, the second was at 75, and the third and fourth were down in the blue water at 100 and 125 fathoms. Each bait hung head down with the shank of the hook inside the bait fish, tied and sewed solid, and all the projecting part of the hook, the curve and the point, was covered with fresh sardines. Each sardine was hooked through both eyes so that it made a half garland of the projecting steel. There was no part of the hook that the great fish could feel which was not sweet smelling and good tasting. The boy had given him 2 fresh small tunas, or albacores, which hung on the 2 deepest lines like plummets, and on the others he had a big blue runner and a yellow jack that had been used before. But they were in good condition still and had the excellent sardines to give them scent and attractiveness. Each line, as thick as a big pencil, was looped onto a green sap stick so that any pull or touch on the bait would make the stick dip, and each line had 40-fathom coils, which could be made fast to the other spare coils so that, if it were necessary, a fish could take out over 300 fathoms of line. Now the man watched the dip of the 3 sticks over the side of the skiff and rowed gently to keep the line straight up and down at their proper depths. It was quite light, and at any moment now the sun would rise. The sun rose thinly from the sea, and the old man could see the other boats, low on the water, well in toward the shore, spread out across the current. Then the sun was brighter, and the glare came on the water, and then, as it rose clear, the flat sea sent it back at his eyes so that it hurt sharply, and he rowed without looking into it. He looked down into the water and watched the lines that went straight down into the dark of the water. He kept them straighter than anyone did, so that at each level in the darkness of the stream there would be a bait waiting exactly where he wished it to be, for if any fish swam there. Others let them drift with the current, and sometimes they were at 60 fathoms when the fishermen thought they were at 100. But, he thought, I keep them with precision. Only I have no luck anymore, but who knows? Maybe today. Every day is a new day. It is better to be lucky, but I would rather be exact. Then when luck comes, you are ready. The sun was 2 hours higher now, and it did not hurt his eyes so much to look into the east. There were only 3 boats in sight now, and they showed very low and far inshore. All my life in the early sun has hurt my eyes, he thought, yet they are still good. In the evening I can look straight into it without getting the blackness. I have more force in the evening too. But in the morning it is painful. Just then he saw a man-o'-war bird with his long black wings circling the sky ahead of him. He made a quick drop, slanting down on his back-swept wings, and then circled again. He's got something, the old man said aloud. He's not just looking. He rowed slowly and steadily toward where the bird was circling. He did not hurry, and he kept his line straight up and down. But he crowded the current a little so that while he was still fishing correctly, though faster than he would have fished if he was not trying to use the bird. The bird went higher in the air and circled again, his wings motionless. Then he dove suddenly, and the old man saw flying fish spurt out of the water and sail desperately over the surface. Dolphin, the old man said aloud. Big dolphin. He shipped his oars and brought a small line in from under the bow. It had a wire leader and a medium-sized hook, and he baited it with one of the sardines. He let it go over the side and then made it fast to a ring bolt in the stern. Then he baited another line and left it coiled in the shade of the bow. He went back to rowing and to watching the long-winged black bird who was working now, low, over the water. As he watched the bird dipped again, slanting his wings for the dive, and then swinging them wildly and ineffectually as he followed the flying fish. The old man could see a slight bulge in the water that the big dolphin raised as they followed the escaping fish. The dolphin were cutting through the water below the flight of the fish and would be in the water driving its speed when the fish dropped. It is a big school of dolphin, he thought. They are widespread and the flying fish have little chance. The bird has no chance. The flying fish are too big for him and they go too fast. He watched the flying fish burst out again and again in the ineffectual movements of the bird. That school has gotten away from me, he thought, but they are moving out too fast and too far. Perhaps I will pick up a stray, and perhaps my big fish is around them. My big fish must be somewhere. The clouds over the low land now rose like mountains, and the coast was only a long green line with the gray-blue hills behind it. The water was so dark blue now, so dark that it was almost purple. As he looked down into it, he saw the red sifting of the plankton in the dark water and the strange light the sun made now. He watched his lines to see them go straight down out of sight into the water, and he was happy to see how much plankton, because it meant fish. The strange light the sun made in the water, now that the sun was higher, meant good weather, and so did the shape of the clouds over the land. But the bird was almost out of sight now, and nothing showed on the surface of the water but some patches of yellow, sun-bleached sargasso weed, and the purple, formalized, iridescent, gelatinous bladder of a Portuguese man-of-war floating close behind the boat. It turned on its side, then righted itself. It floated cheerfully as a bubble with its long, deadly purple filaments trailing a yard behind it in the water. "Agua mala," the man said, "you whore." From where he hung lightly with his oars, he looked down into the water and saw the tiny fish that were colored like the trailing filaments and swam behind them and under them in the small shade of the bubble that it made as it drifted. They were immune to its poison, but men were not, and when some of the filaments would catch on a line and rest there slimy and purple while the old man was working a fish, he would have welts and sores on his arms and hands of the sort that poison ivy or poison oak can give. But these poisonings from the agua mala came quickly and struck like a whiplash. The iridescent bubbles were beautiful, but they were the falsest thing in the sea, and the old man loved to see the big turtles eating them. The turtles saw them, approached them from the front, then shut their eyes so they were completely carapaced, and ate them, filaments and all. The old man loved to see the turtles eat them, and he loved to walk on the beach after a storm and hear them pop when he stepped on them with the horny soles of his feet. He loved green turtles and hawkbills with their elegance and speed and their great value, and he had a friendly contempt for the huge, stupid loggerheads, yellow in their armor plating, strange in their lovemaking, and happily eating the Portuguese men of war with their eyes shut. He had no mysticism about turtles, although he had gone on turtle boats for many years. He was sorry for them all, even the great trunkbacks that were as long as the skiff and weighed a ton. Most people were heartless about turtles because a turtle's heart will beat for hours after it has been cut up and butchered. But, the old man thought, I have such a heart too, and my feet and hands are like theirs. He ate the white eggs to give himself strength. He ate them all through May to be strong in September and October for the truly big fish. He also drank a cup of shark liver oil each day from the big drum in the shack where many of the fishermen kept their gear. It was there for all fishermen who wanted it. Most fishermen hated the taste, but it was no worse than getting up at the hours that they had rose, and it was very good against colds and grips, and it was good for the eyes. Now the old man looked up and saw that the bird was circling again. He's found fish, he said aloud. No flying fish broke the surface, and there was no scattering of bait. But as the old man watched, a small tuna rose in the air, turned and dropped headfirst into the water. The tuna shone silver in the sun, and after he had dropped back into the water, another and another rose as if they were jumping in all directions, churning the water and leaping in long jumps after the bait. They were circling it and driving it. If they don't travel too fast, I will get into them, the old man thought, and he watched the school working the water white, and the bird was now dropping and dipping into the bait fish that were forced to the surface in their panic. The bird is a great help, the old man said. Just then the stern line came taut under his foot where he had kept the loop of line, and he dropped his oars and felt the weight of the small tuna shivering pool as he held the line and commenced to haul it in. The shivering increased as he pulled in, and he could see the blue-black of the fish in the water and the gold of his sides before he swung him over the side and into the boat. He lay in the stern in the sun, compact and bullet-shaped, his big, unintelligent eyes staring as he thumped his life out against the planking of the boat, with the quick, shivering strokes of his neat, fast-moving tail. The old man hit him on the head for kindness and kicked him, his body still shuddering under the shade of the stern. Albacore, he said aloud, He'll make a beautiful bait. He'll weigh 10 pounds. He did not remember when he had first started to talk aloud when he was by himself. He had sung when he was by himself in the old days, and he had sung at night sometimes when he was alone steering on his watch in the smacks or in the turtle boats. He had probably started to talk aloud when alone, when the boy had left, but he did not remember. When he and the boy had fished together, they usually spoke only when it was necessary. They talked at night or when they were stormbound by bad weather. It was considered a virtue not to talk unnecessarily at sea, and the old man had always considered it so and respected it. But now he said his thoughts aloud many times, since there was no one that he could annoy. If the others heard me talking out loud, they would think I am crazy, he said aloud. But since I am not crazy, I do not care. And the rich have radios to talk to them in their boats and to bring them the baseball. Now is no time to think of baseball, he thought. Now is time to think of only one thing, that which I was born for. There might be a big one around that school, he thought. I picked up only a straggler from the albacore that were feeding. But they are working far out and fast. Everything shows on the surface today travels very fast and far to the northeast. Can that be the time of day, or is it some sign of weather that I do not know? He could not see the green of the shore now, but only the tops of the blue hills that showed white as though they were snow-capped, and the clouds that looked like high snow mountains above them. The sea water was very dark, and the light made prisms in the water. The myriad flecks of the plankton were annulled now by the high sun, and it was only the great deep prisms in the blue water that the man saw with his lines going straight down into the water that was a mile deep. The tuna, the fishermen called all fish of that species tuna, and only distinguished among them by their proper names when they came to sell them or to trade them for baits, were down again. The sun was hot now, and the old man felt it on the back of his neck, and felt the sweat trickle down the back as he rowed. I could just drift, he thought, and sleep, and put a bite of line in around my toe to wake me. But today is 85 days, and I should fish the day well. Just then, watching his lines, he saw one of the projecting green sticks dip sharply. Join me tomorrow when we find out what, or if anything, he caught.